We came from the arcades. I know the majority of the people here have not experienced the arcades like I have and a lot of the old school players. It is absolutely a necessity, in my opinion, to maintain that mentality, that culture, because we ended up how we are because of that culture. And if you change that culture, if you erase that history from our scene, we become a different scene, right? And that's kind of the concern. One of the reasons why I've always been pushing for consoles over PCs in terms of fighting game community is because I'm always of the mindset that I don't want the best players to be the one that can just, they have the nicest PCs and so other people can't compete because they can't get state-of-the-art PCs. And so for me, it was like consoles are better because you get a PlayStation 5 and it's the same PlayStation 5 as everyone else and you can play. And nowadays you don't even have to talk about the price of joysticks because there's plenty of pad players that are doing just fine in Street Fighter 5, right? Nowadays, though, I don't make that argument as much because, let's face it, PlayStation 5 pretty damn expensive right now. So it's hard to even really say that consoles are saving money, but, there is that element that when you played on an arcade CVS2 and you went to another arcade, outside of the joysticks being busted, you're still playing the same CVS2 as everybody else. And so that's kind of how I feel about the consoles, right? So like if you're playing Street Fighter 6 on PS5 and then you go to a tournament and you play Street Fighter 6 on PS5, at least it's the same game that you're going to get because there's no different specs, etc. Except unless you're not aware and the TV you have at home has horrible display lag. Could happen, but that's just the thing is we're all in this weird gray fuzzy area because back in the CRT days it didn't matter at all. You had a CRT, they all just kind of worked the same. So FGC culture is like street culture. Don't erase it even if the platforms go corporate. And that's a great way of putting it. It is about street culture, right? If you look at stuff like the X Games, you can see how hard they try their best to maintain their culture. Same thing happens in World Series of Poker. You always see all the old heads talking about this is how it was before. They try to maintain the culture of your sport, whether it's athletic sport, e-sport, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon cards, whatever. There's a reason every single one of these entities try so hard to maintain their culture because it's important. It's important to know where the scene came from. It's important to know where the people who pioneered and created and grew the scene, what their backgrounds were and why they tried to grow the scene in the direction that they tried to do, because there's something very important about that. And so to me, Magic the Gathering is a whole different story. Olaf can speak to that better than I can, of course, but obviously I see the Kappa. I know you're just joking, but Magic, obviously, they didn't realize what was going on a lot of times. There's a lot of things that were broken and busted, and obviously when you're talking about CCGs or TCGs, whatever the genre is officially called, you can't patch things in that culture, which is really, really difficult for them. They have to just outright ban stuff because there's really no way to patch things. So, but yeah, the whole point is that we need to maintain that culture. And that's what I'm worried about most, is entities trying to erase that culture. What I love about what Red Bull has done is that you could see in all their presentations, when they did the New York, when they went back to France, etc., they always create a very gritty, streets kind of view. Like they really do treat Red Bull Kumite like it is a blacktop basketball kind of vibe to it, when they or they make the octagon, right? Like they make their own little octagon. For them, the presentation is less about being slick and it's more about being this is a homegrown hobby. This is a grassroots hobby. It was born from all these people in arcades, and they're trying to maintain it. So Red Bull has done a really good job embracing the culture of the fighting game community. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to stick around with that. Is that Richard Wynn, former Marvel player and current developer of his own fighting game? If that is the same Richard Wynn, obviously I'm sure there's a lot of Richard Wynns out there. Atsuru Kihara says, "Hi James, I love your commentary. I was so pleasantly surprised when I saw you commentating Classic Tetris. How did that happen? You're my favorite commentator." I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, so the fighting game community, it's the culture that I am most worried about right now. And as long as Rick is still in charge, my concerns are less about panic, right? Like my feelings are like, no, look, Rick understands, even though he didn't grow up in the arcades and such, he learned from a lot of the people who did grow up in the arcades, right? I mean, obviously, he talks with Jabali a lot. He learned a lot of his TOing stuff from Keats. Keats obviously grew up in the arcade cultures, etc. So yeah, and that's the thing, right? I can see them making an attempt to gentrify EVO. I don't even know how you gentrify an event like EVO, but I get what you mean. Is just basically sanitize it, like remove all the flavor out of it, basically, kind of thing. And that's the area of concern that I have, and that, as long as I am involved, I will be fighting against. It's harder and harder these days because a lot of the bigger companies now, if you aren't doing exactly what they kind of want you to do, they may not hire you anymore. I'm not saying that I've done anything to piss anyone off, but let's say it starts to go a different direction, and then all of a sudden on commentary I decide to go off script and just be like, we gotta stop doing this and blah blah blah. It's a tough situation, right? Like it's not a good it will affect your career, let's just put it that way. But you know, I'm not in the same kind of position where I can drive the narrative of the fighting game community as well as I used to be able to. And, you know, it's probably not really my job to do that anymore. But the reason why I feel so compelled to all the time is because, like I said, I'm trying very hard to preserve a lot of what we know about the fighting game community. I want to preserve the culture. I want to preserve the history because I think that's really important. I don't want FGC commentary to get very formal. You know, it's almost why sometimes on commentary I'll make references to production or laugh at things and stuff like that, because I don't want it to start feeling formal. That's my main concern about the purchase right now. I was concerned about that even when RTS got into the picture. I was like, oh no, like, are they gonna try to do, and then my logic back then was, as long as Rick is still in charge, I have a lot more comfort in that. And so it's kind of the same thing at this point, right? So Kadia buying RTS and Nodwin buying the Sony part of EVO, as long as Rick is still in charge, I have faith, because I know, you know, I know the way. Well, I feel like I can see Rick's vision a lot of the times, and, you know, someone who's, you know, like, oh, let's gentrify, or let's cleanse the FGC, you know, et cetera, you know, but you go to EVO and then they have this EVO museum where you go in there and you see all this old artwork and all the old controllers and stuff, you know, and they get a lot of people to go up and interview old school players. They're doing the Hall of Fame stuff now at EVO, and you can even see on their EVO video channels, they're interviewing a lot of old school players and even some new school players and stuff, but they're trying very hard to maintain as much of that history concept and feel as possible. So, like I said, just based off of Rick's track record, as long as he's kind of in charge and still has the ability to make a lot of the final decisions, I'm not too concerned. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other concerns, right? This is where we do get into the political area and, you know, do you support this? Do you not support this and such? And, you know, like, I'm not going to get too much into this because, again, there's no way to, I mean, even me saying this right now is probably going to get a lot of people mad at me. Like, oh, James, you're not taking a stand. You should take a side. Like, why are you so wishy-washy? Like, it's just one of those situations where, like, no matter what you do, like, you will come out badly, you know? Everybody has different thresholds, I guess you could call it, for certain aspects. Again, you'll see somebody who's so against this and you're like, but wait, you support this, so you're a hypocrite now. There's just so many ways to twist what people say about this from a political standpoint in the wrong direction. I will continue to try to do the thing that in my brain I think is the right thing to do. And that's all I can say. That's all I can say, right? And there are multiple aspects of this. Yes, there are, hey, I want to preserve the FGC in the way it is. And then there's the aspect of, I want the FGC to be as popular as possible. And then there's the very last aspect, which is, I do like being able to afford food. You know, like, there's a lot of things pulling in different directions here, and every person's gonna have their different things driving their choices and influences. And all I say is that for everybody out there to form your own opinion on it. Don't take what other people say just because you like them or because you hate them, just because it's more palatable to one side of the political, you know, left-right spectrum, whatever like that. Don't make any choices, don't make any decisions based off of that. Take the time to research, take the time to figure it out for yourself, and do what is right for you. And yeah, I might not agree with some of them. Some people can turn anything into something hateful to minority groups and such like that, and I'm not going to agree with them. I would definitely not want them to be able to celebrate their view on things, but I am not, I mean, what am I going to do? I'm not going to go out to every single one of those people and try to change their minds. It's just like, it's not going to happen, right? So again, I think the best thing right now is that from the political standpoint about this whole thing, form your own decision. Take the time to do some research on it, look into it. And I'm not saying that you're going to research and see something that'll change your mind. In fact, it's very likely you'll research it and find more reasons for you to feel the way that you feel. And that's fine. But like I said, just, I know a lot of people out there want to hear what people in more important positions have to say about it. But in the end, even influencers out there, major heads in the FGC and stuff, like, they've got their life that they're trying to figure out themselves. And that's going to affect a lot of decisions out there. So, you know, you can't take what some of these influencers say, even if you love them to death, at face value, because what is affecting their decisions is going to be different than what would affect your decision. And honestly, I mean, this advice that I'm giving right here is not even like, this is not even limited to fighting games and the buyout of, you know, RTS from Kadia. This is just life in general, right? This is just life in general. You know, we all live by different philosophies out there. Well, thank you, Botoxication and Richard Roos. Thank you, thank you. And yeah, I mean, some people are saying like, oh, well, now I'm going to boycott everything EVO. And you know what? I love EVO to death. EVO means so much to me. So much of my own life and history and personality is tied to EVO. And I want everybody to watch EVO. And I want everybody to watch EVO. But if anybody's saying I can't watch EVO anymore, I'm like, yeah. I don't have anything to say to that. So Unfortunately, it is impossible to perfectly preserve any culture over long periods of time. The best we can do is accurately document the culture it is while it is happening. Try to share those moments to later generations. Half true, I think, because I do think a lot of entities are able to maintain a lot of that culture. You know, even to this day, the fact that everybody has to wear white at Wimbledon. Like, you are not allowed to wear a tennis outfit that isn't white at Wimbledon. That's just the tradition. Even the fact that after decades and maybe a century of playing tennis, you know, you don't make noises during the point. As soon as the guy serves, you can't talk. If anybody makes a noise, they replay the point. And is that for function? Doubtful. I'm sure it's just a culture thing. I'm sure that someone who ran Wimbledon a long time ago said, this is how it works. And then it just ends up that way, and now they preserve it. There is a lot of preservation of the culture in there. The NBA is a great example of that, even with as much mass marketed the NBA has become. There's still a lot of culture back there, because when you talk to a lot of the best players, one of the things that always made me appreciate Kobe Bryant more, obviously, you know, there are lots of reasons to dislike him, but he was on the Lakers and I was a Lakers fan, so of course I'm gonna have a biased view. But you know, people always asked him, like, you know, like, hey, are you the best NBA player? And he's like, you can't even answer that question. It's disrespectful to Wilt Chamberlain, to Bill Russell, to all the greats of the past, et cetera, et cetera. You know, they preserve that history in the NBA a lot, you know? And like I said, they still, like, they don't talk about, like, it's not like they avoid talking about, you know, the blacktop basketball, the and one circuits, you know, that kind of essence of basketball. They don't pretend that that doesn't exist. They talk about those things very clearly, and they talk about it with a lot of reverence. This person from the blacktops, sometimes I'll just go there and they'll play, and there's a lot of reverence for that original culture. The advantage that basketball has is that they still have blacktops, whereas in the FGC, we don't have arcades anymore. So it is a lot harder for us to preserve our classic culture. As long as I'm involved in the scene, I will do my best to maintain that and pass that knowledge to as many people as I can so that we can keep that talking. But as Jinx Deli said, it's hard to maintain that. It is hard. It takes work. Maintaining the culture is not something that happens naturally. Maintaining culture is absolutely something that has to be strived for. It has to be actively sought after. And so, yeah, it is very easy to lose culture in any scene. But the thing that keeps the culture around is that usually a lot of the people who end up in more important positions ended up there because of their passion for the scene and because that they know the history and they know where it came from and the roots and all that stuff like that. So a lot of these scenes have been able to maintain their culture through that, which is, again, why I didn't want MLG taking over, because you just know that they would have had all their own streamers and their own people, and they would have changed the format because they tried to do that before. They had this really terrible rule when MLG was running all the FGC stuff years and decades ago. Oh, God, it was such a stupid rule. And, you know, like, that's the thing, right? So as long as we have the right people in charge to preserve the culture, and like I said, you know, Rick is not okaying all this floor space for an EVO museum that literally will add no money to the event, right? Like, I don't think anybody is buying a ticket to EVO specifically for the EVO museum. And the EVO Museum can certainly be used for other booths that you could sell for space, and they're paying people to put it together and to maintain it, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you aren't gonna get somebody okaying an EVO museum or a fighting game museum at EVO because they're just like, woo, you know, kind of thing. It is one of those things that has to be sought after. You have to actively preserve your culture. And as long as I'm around, I'm going to try to make sure that we do our best to actively preserve that culture. I don't see that going south in the FGC right now. I don't see any signs about that.